This past week, the Trump administration completed negotiations of an initial deal with Iran that would, for the time being, end the war that Donald Trump began against Iran at the end of this past February. And what we're seeing here is a continuation of video that I made earlier, talking about how Iran has become an albatross around Donald Trump's neck, um, and we're seeing how that's taking place. There's a link to that video in this description if you haven't seen it. But what was created out of these negotiations? What was called a memorandum of understanding, or an MOU. Now, in diplomatic speak, an MOU is essentially supposed to be a framework. It is an agenda for how further negotiations are going to take place, what is going to be on the agenda, and what is not going to be on the agenda, and how the parties are going to approach the issues that are in front of them. Now, in this case, that was spelled there. Many of those things were spelled out in this MOU, but there are other things in this MOU that are specific actions that are to be taken when the negotiations, as soon as the MOU is adopted and the negotiations begin. And many of those actions provide direct benefit to Iran in terms of both financial relief and also strategic benefits to Iran that indeed go far beyond what would they probably would have expected to be able to get. So I want to talk about this. I've read this MOU, and I want to talk about it. And in that light, I want to describe for you how Donald Trump's latest deal with Iran is the greatest American strategic blunder in modern times. So let's talk about this. So there are a number of key points in this agreement, and I want to talk about that here. First of all, there is a 60-day ceasefire, which has been settled upon, which is going to open up a 60-day negotiation window to proceed to some of the more thorny issues. That period is also extendable if both parties want to extend it, which is almost certain to happen. The Iranian nuclear deal negotiated with the Obama administration took years. It didn't take 60 days. These are very difficult and very technical negotiations if they're handled properly. During that time period, the Strait of Hormuz will be reopened, and it will take about 30 days to get that to it's supposed to get that to fully take place. There have to be mines have to be cleared out of the strait, and pieces have to be put into place. They're going to be getting talks on the Iranian nuclear program. And in the meantime, there's going to be some significant sanctions relief for Iran, some of which will happen right away, some of which will happen uh, once the final deal is completed. In addition to the strategic benefits, there are a number of financial benefits which Iran is going to be reaping out of this deal, including the unfreezing of assets previously frozen by both American and international bodies, the lifting of restrictions on Iranian oil exports, and a $300 billion reconstruction fund, which is going to be administered to rebuild Iran. Iran is calling it reparations. The Trump administration is calling it economic assistance, but it is an item that has generated a great deal of controversy. So I want to start this off by reading point number one. I'm not going to read all of the points, but this one I think is particularly important, and because it's got a lot of pitfalls in it. And it states the United States of America and the Islamic Republic of Iran and their allies in the current war, by signing this MOU, declare the immediate and permanent termination of military operations on all fronts, including in Lebanon, and undertake from now on not to initiate any war or any military operation against each other, and ensuring the territorial integrity and sovereignty of Lebanon. Final deal will confirm the permanent termination of war on all fronts, including in Lebanon, and other provisions of this paragraph. This paragraph is very interesting because it specifically calls out Lebanon, which has been a primary focus of Israel in their attacks against Hezbollah targets in Lebanon as a portion of this war. Now, the United States has not been engaged in operations against Lebanon as a result of this. We have strictly been engaged in operations against Iran. But this piece was put in there, and it essentially calls for Israel to cease operations in Lebanon. But the problem with this is that Israel is not a signatory of this MOU. They were not consulted in the discussions around this MOU, and it was presented to them as a fait accompli. And since the announcement and signing of this MOU, there have been additional attacks in Lebanon, conducted by Israel. This has significantly strained the relationship between the Trump administration and the Israeli government over this. Now, one can have their own opinions about the Israeli government and the way that they've been conducting themselves lately, and I certainly do. But this is a pretty significant development in terms of essentially very publicly giving Israelis the stiff arm in this, and they've been told to essentially back off and do what we say to do. Whether that continues or not is a whole other question, and it would not surprise me at all if Israel continues to press their attacks in Lebanon and perhaps may even blow this entire deal up in the process. First of all, I want to talk about the Strait of Hormuz. The deal calls for the opening of the Strait of Hormuz, which Iran closed following our attacks on them. We then also retaliated by blockading their ports. This was something that virtually every analyst who was warning about what would happen if we were to attack Iran would happen. And Iran blockade they shut down the strait, which is not a difficult thing to do. It is a fairly narrow piece of waterway. A couple of mines in the water will do it. Will do it. At which point the shipping companies won't tolerate sending their tankers through and take on that risk. So the strait has been reopened, but a key component of this has been the discussion around tolls. Iran has taken the opportunity to assert sovereignty, if you will, territorial sovereignty over the Strait of Hormuz, and they are saying they want to do this jointly with Oman, which occupies the southern half of the strait. Discussion going back and forth is the Iranians charging tolls to tankers that go through the Strait of Hormuz, and the agreement actually spells out a couple of things. First of all, for the first 60 days, there would be no tolls on ships going through the Strait of Hormuz. But after that, the agreement calls for a a framework to be put into place where Iran and Oman would jointly control the strait, and it leaves open the possibility of tolls being collected. Now, Iran may call them environmental impact fees. They may call them "don't bomb us" fees. However they're going to call it, but they are absolutely going to look at imposing tolls on the strait. Another piece that is going to benefit Iran immediately is the provision in the agreement which calls for the Treasury Department to to put out waivers on the export of Iranian oil. So Iranian oil will now be able to be much more freely traded on the open market than it ever has been before, including giving access to the foreign banking system. They have been largely shut out of the foreign banking system for the past 47 years, and this, for the first time, allows them to be able to do that. That allows for currency to flow much more freely into Iran than it has in the past. And so this opens up the Iranians to be receiving billions of dollars in oil revenue. And given the fact that oil is now trading much higher than it was before the war started, Iran is looking to make a windfall out of this. And this is going to be happening immediately. Another piece that's going to be happening immediately is that Iranian financial assets that have been held in this country and have been frozen in this country, which is from what I've been reading is valued at about $24 billion, are going to be unfrozen, and those assets will also be given back to Iran. Now, I do want to hop in the Wayback Machine here for a little bit, because when the Obama administration negotiated the treaty with Iran, which was called the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, or the JCPOA, that treaty allowed for $1.2 billion in relief of frozen assets, and the Republicans went completely ballistic over that, and said that we were basically paying money for people who were sponsoring terrorism. This deal is 20 times that, just in the sanctions relief. So there's no restrictions on what the money can be used for. Iran can use it for whatever purpose it wants to. So both the lifting on the restrictions on Iranian oil and the unfreezing of assets are going to happen immediately under this MOU, and the ability of Iran to toll the straits, will be coming up probably within the next couple of months. The next two pieces are linked to the adoption of the final agreement, and that is the termination of all sanctions against Iran, which is tied to the final agreement, and is also people, you may have heard of the $300 billion um, for what Iran calls reparations, what the Trump administration calls economic development assistance, but it is a very, very significant a sum of money there that the agreement calls to be put together. Now, there is no in the Trump administration has been adamant that this will not be American tax dollars. Now, whether that's true or not is hard to say. The agreement does give the United States the ability to manage that fund. How that fund would be created, who would be contributing to it? Is that Omani money? Is it other Gulf money? Is it wherever is it coming from? We kind of don't know right now. I was reading recently that the total value of the Iranian economy, the total Iranian gross domestic product, is about $300 billion. So this would essentially double the size of the Iranian economy overnight. And so you're talking about providing a massive cash influx into the Iranian economy just by doing that. And the problem then becomes taking a government like Iran, a government which has even more hardline than it was before, without any restrictions on what it can do in terms of funding terrorist groups or anything else, and giving them a massive cash infusion. So what could possibly go wrong with that? The agreement also provides major strategic benefits to Iran. Two of them I've already talked about, which is the termination of the military operations, including in Lebanon, which sets us off against Israel and all of the issues around that, and an end to the U.S. blockade of Iranian ports, allowing Iran to get back into the oil business again. The other two pieces are a declaration of non-interference in each other's internal affairs, which is kind of a slap in the face to the Iranian people. Because I remember back in January, when the Iranian government was slaughtering its civilians by the thousands, Donald Trump famously said, "Help is on the way. Rise up and overthrow your government. Help is on the way." Well, now we're declaring that we're not going to interfere in their internal affairs, basically saying to these hardline, really pretty thuggish people, you do what you want to your own people. We're not going to interfere. Another piece that is tucked into this, that a lot of people were scratching their heads about, and the agreement calls for removing all U.S. forces from proximity to Iran. Now, the question is, what does that mean? There are American military bases throughout the Middle East. Are they talking about forcing us to close American military bases in the Middle East and essentially withdraw from the Middle East? That really hasn't been determined. And there are also a few items that haven't been covered at all. There is no mention here whatsoever about curbing the Iranian ballistic missile program, something which was very top of mind both to the Trump administration and to the Israelis when this war started, because there was a concern about the Iranian missile program and what it could do to the region. There is no discussion at all around continued support for Iranian proxies like Hamas and Hezbollah. And keep in mind, this MOU is an agenda setting for additional discussions. That means these items are not going to be on that agenda. So Iran is looked to be given a pass on that. And then the other items not being covered at all, which curbs on how sanctions relief would be used, that the Iranians must use the sanctions relief for the benefit of their own people and not for their export of terror, and that also work to curb Iranian human rights abuses inside their own country. But that's off the table, given our statement that we won't have any comments on their quote internal affairs. So I do want to talk about the issues around the nuclear program. And I'm going to put up point number 8 here. I'm not going to read the whole thing verbatim because I think I put you all to sleep. But essentially, what it talks about is the first statement is a very important one. The Islamic Republic of Iran reaffirms that it shall not procure or develop nuclear weapons. This is exactly the same thing that Iran has been saying for decades. There is nothing new here. It says we reaffirm that we will not procure or develop nuclear weapons. But they have a nuclear program. They have been enriching nuclear material. The other piece is that the U.S. wants to work with dealing with with the stockpiled enriched uranium that is within Iran. From what I've been reading, there's about 1,000 kilograms of it. And now the only thing that the agreement says about the IAEA is that they would be present for the initial assembly of the enriched material. And one of the things that they talked about doing is called downblending, which is essentially a process by which you take enriched uranium and you make it less enriched uranium. But the IAEA would only be there for that one purpose. It's important to remember that this process of downblending uranium can be reversed. You're essentially diluting something, you can reverse that process. And there is no mention in here at all of ongoing international inspection of Iranian facilities. There's no mention in here at all about taking steps to extract that enriched uranium from the country, and there's no statement in here at all about what level of enrichment is acceptable, because there is some low level enrichment that can be used in support of a civilian nuclear program. So this is a very, very poorly worded and almost it's a very slippery section, because Iran could find ways to wiggle out of this. But this looks to me like, yes, the Islamic Republic of Iran reaffirms that it will not procure or develop nuclear weapons. Pinky swear, and that's kind of about it. And this is very weak, and without any kind of monitoring in place, without any kind of agreed upon inspection protocols, Iran could walk around this pretty easily. And this is where the Trump administration's insistence in not having subject matter experts involved in their negotiations is really coming back to bite them. Because when the Obama administration negotiated the JCPOA, they had hundreds of nuclear experts and physicists and everyone else involved, people who understood the science of nuclear weapons, and understood how to put protocols in place to be able to curb their development and use. All of this stuff that we're giving Iran, all of the sanctions relief, all the monetary relief, is focused on this one point, and this one point is extremely weak. That is essentially where we are in this whole process. We have given Iran a lot, and we are getting very, very little. So the situation that we're running into within a relatively short period of time, Iran, with sanctions lifted, possibly tapping into this $300 billion fund for reconstruction, and could be in a situation of rebuilding its military, rebuilding its offensive capability, accelerating its support for proxy groups in the region, and essentially being a bad actor on steroids, because they have been running on a shoestring for the past 47 years in terms of what kind of money they've had available to them. Now we're really talking about amping up the amount of money that they have available to wreak havoc in the region and around the world, and getting back very, very little for it. And that is why this agreement is a strategic disaster for the United States and for our allies in the world. And the reason that we're in this situation is because Donald Trump insisted on starting a war that he had absolutely no idea of how to finish. You provide the Iranians with the opening to exert their own pressure on us by closing the Strait of Hormuz, and now they're in a situation of they see that they're in the proverbial catbird seat here. And even as we go forward to negotiate the provisions of the final deal, if there's friction between it, all Iran has to do is threaten to close the strait again, and Donald Trump will see, oh my God, the oil prices went up, the stock market went down. Those are the only things that he sees, and the American people aren't going to like that. So we'll wink and nod and let the Iranians get away with that. And that's the setup that we're putting ourselves in. There is virtually no one in the foreign policy community who thinks this is even remotely a good deal. And I do think, from a symbolism perspective, I think it was interesting that it was signed in Versailles, of all places, the location of another one of the worst diplomatic blunders in history, because that was where the Treaty of Versailles was signed that ended World War I, that gave us World War II. So having a signing ceremony in Versailles was very, very poor choice on their part. The only thing worse would have been to make it in Munich, where you had Neville Chamberlain appeasing Adolf Hitler, and this has been called appeasement in the exact same way. So I hope you found this interesting. I do want to put one pitch at the end. Please like, comment, and subscribe on my channel. I'm just getting started with this, having a lot of fun in the process in terms of getting used to how to put all these things together. And I'd love to hear your thoughts, and I'd love if you could let your friends and colleagues know about this. I could really use your support going forward. Thanks.